Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. So, we have a Patreon, and on that Patreon, our high tier level members get the chance to ask us to make a specific kind of episode they want to see. So Mike Coy, one of our high tier level Patreon members, reached out and said they wanted to have a sword baldric made. I'll be honest with you, I was unsure at first what a sword baldric was, but it turns out it's one of these guys here that's just kind of used to hold your sword, which I love. I love it so much because my character that I play needs something that does exactly that thing. So that's today's episode. Today we are going to make a sword baldric out of leather. So without much further ado, let's jump right into it and level up this skill. Now, as I am wont to do when a project like this comes across my desk, table, workbench, I asked the resident editor and pain in the ass crow Maddie to come up with a design for me. And as is her wont, she went completely overboard. Check this thing out. I super dig it. She basically explained she wanted to be like a LARP Batman's utility belt. Basically little rings and points where you can hang stuff on it, because when we went to our LARP, if you didn't see the episode where we cover us going to our LARP, you can check that out here. But when we went to our LARP, one of the biggest problems we had was just where to put all the crap we had to keep with us. Not only that, but she went ahead and designed it kind of in a style of my character. He has kind of like that gunslinger swagger to him. And the inclusion of like that bandolier and whatever, it looks really cool. And again, a place to put my sword would be great, because up until now, I've just been kind of shoving it into my belt, which is a pain and just doesn't look as good. Oh, speaking of my sword, for this build, I'm going to be using this Ranger sword from Epic Armory. But you can use this design for any sword because it's going to be made adjustable. Okay, so starting with the bit that actually holds the sword, I wanted to make sure that I encapsulated this upper portion of the blade, so it was long enough that it didn't swivel all over the place while I walked. In measuring out that area, I found out that 10 inches long looks pretty good. Now, the leather I'm using to make this part is this 6-ounce veg tan leather that I got from Tandy's. After transferring my measurement on, I go ahead and cut a straight line using a brand new razor knife. I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. Don't cut with a dull knife. Always use a brand new knife. Super dangerous because you gotta pull and just don't do it. So with that cut out, I go ahead and start wrapping that leather around my sword 1.5 times and then mark where that lands. I do it this way because, again, I want it to be able to accept like a larger sword if I need to. By letting it overlap that way, it gives me enough room so that if I need to expand it at all, it can. Interestingly enough, I found this measurement to be about 10 inches as well. So really, depending on the size of your sword, you can just do a 10 by 10 square and that'll work. But I also went ahead and cut one that was 10 inches by 6 inches, just because I really wanted to have some kind of short sword or dagger that hangs there as well. And I figured I'd plan ahead and just make sure I have one of those if I need it. Now, I also knew I would need a whole bunch of like straps and buckles to hold this thing together. So I just went ahead and used my strap cutter to cut 1/2-inch strips out. Now, I don't have any specific measurements to give you because I was kind of figuring it out as I went along. But 2 things, and it's true with most of my projects, I make these things custom to me, so with you, the sizes are probably gonna vary anyways. And 2, if you really do want a template, you can either buy it at our store coming up in the future. I think it'll be next week that we'll have it up in the store. Link in the description below for our store. Or if you're one of our Patreon members, you'll just be getting it in your mailbox like you do all of our templates. But needless to say, I just cut a whole bunch of straps knowing I'd need them. Finally, for the body of the thing, the actual belts themselves, I busted out some 9-ounce veg tan leather and cut them to 1.5 inch wide strips. This extra thickness will help it hold up all my junk without like stretching out too much over time. Okay, so while picking up materials for this project, I spoke with one of the people over at Tandy's. Tandy's, killing me. But one of the employees there showed us the way her belt was put together, and I really love that, so I wanted to incorporate this in this project. Basically, rather than a buckle, this employs a D-ring. On one side of the belt, the D-ring gets locked into place by bending the leather over it and securing it with some rivets. Then you send the other side of the belt through the opening, pulling it tight and securing it with a button. So with it placed around my waist, I just went ahead and marked it with my nail so that I knew where to cut the leather. Then I used the D-ring to give me a good template to round off that end. Now, I'm always cutting rounded edges like this on my belts and straps, and I do it by hand, and it's kind of a pain every time I do it, especially when I have a lot of them. But I'm way too cheap to buy one of like the little rounded cutters that you hit with the hammer that make it perfect every time. I haven't gotten around to doing it. But I want to show you kind of a cool trick I figured out to make my own tool. That comes a little later on, but I'm really excited about it. Okay, so for the actual like bandolier section, I just draped this strip of leather across my shoulder and measured it out so it just about touched my waistline. Then I cut that to size as well. Now, because I want that bandolier to be useful, it's gonna carry weight as well. Like I'm gonna have connection points so that my quiver can connect directly to it. I might wanna put like daggers and crap on it, but I want that to be able to connect to that belt really strongly too. So to help facilitate that, I also cut some straps out of that 9-ounce leather. The way this will work is the strap will connect to the bottom of that bandolier so that I can loop it onto one of the connection points of the belt and lock it into place. This will also give me a way to adjust length on the fly if I'm wearing like extra layers in the wintertime or armor. I just went ahead and marked these with my nail as well so I can cut it. And again, for your measurements at home, just use your body as a measurement device as well. It's made to fit you, right? All right, so at this point, I've cut a bunch of strips and stuff. And again, like I said, I don't have the tool to make those rounded ends, and there's a lot of rounded ends to cut. So I decided a little experiment was in order. Basically, I took this little piece of aluminum pipe that I had lying around and made a small cut at the very end, lengthwise down. Then I made another cut to remove that little half piece of metal there. Next, I went back in with my sanding wheel and sharpened up the edge that remained. Then finally, I cut the whole thing off with a hacksaw around the 4-inch mark. This leaves me with this neat little half-round cutting tool that honestly works perfectly for straps. It's the exact size I needed, and it takes just seconds to do what it would have taken me a few minutes to do on every piece. So for the rest of the straps you see on this thing, that's how they were cut, just bam. Love it, so good. I'm for sure gonna make more of these in various sizes using steel pipe because the aluminum's gonna start to dull pretty quickly. But seriously, this worked really well. I'm gonna do one of these. That worked really well. All right, so with all my little strips and straps cut, I went ahead and used my edge beveler just to start cleaning up all of the edges I have so far. Next, I start to lay out how everything's gonna go together, starting with that D-ring buckle. I secure the ring by folding over roughly 5 inches worth of material at the end and punching holes where the rivets will lock that into place. Because these are snap rivets, I was able to temporarily snap them together just to make sure that everything was laying out exactly how I wanted them. Then just looping the end of my belt through that D-ring and wrapping it around, I could see that it had the fit and look that I was going for. Liking that fit, I just used the sharp point of my wing divider to mark where the end of my belt falls on the inside. So to be able to actually like adjust the size of that belt, I decided to use one of these stud buttons, also known as a Sam Browne button. It basically consists of this threaded bottom bit and this upper stud that screws into place, which locks it onto the leather. Basically, by placing buttonholes all along the front part of that leather, that little button will be able to fold back and adjust the length by using those holes. You'll see, it'll make a lot more sense in a little bit. To get those holes spaced out where I wanted them to be though, I just went in with my wing divider, set it at 1 inch apart, and starting at the mark that I made, walked it all the way to the end of my belt. This leaves me with evenly spaced marks where my holes need to go. I then went back in and punched my holes where all of those marks were. Then used a razor knife to cut a little slit at the top of every one of these holes, which makes them kind of look like a little keyhole. Finally, at the end of the belt, I secured my Sam Browne button into place. This keyhole shape allows the hole to open up just big enough to accept the top of that button. And as you can see, this is kind of a really clean way to make a belt. And because that button comes from the inside, there's no hanging straps you need to tuck away or like a keeper of some sort you need to put it in. It holds really securely, but when you want to take it off, it's just a button flick away. You know, in case you gotta like strip mid-back. I don't know what you're doing. I'm not judging you. Okay, so like I said before, the vision is to have kind of like rings and different connection points on this belt for things to strap onto. So to figure out the best place to put all of those, I just kind of draped that bandolier over my shoulder where I thought it should land, and then made a little mark in the leather at those spots. This way I can change whatever side the bandolier hangs on and it'll still hit those rings. Now, if you look at the original drawing here, those rings are actually just connected by a couple little strips of leather, which was cool, but I thought maybe we'd get a lot more functionality if I actually use long strips of leather so that you not only have those rings to hang on, but you can then use those strips of leather to hang and tie stuff to or whatever. Basically, the layout will look like this, with those strips of leather wrapping around the rings and then being locked into place with rivets. And this will hopefully not only just give us those cool connection points, but also look kind of badass as well. While we're setting everything up, I also took those 9-ounce straps that I cut for the bandolier connection points and punched in some buttonholes all along those. This I'll connect to the bottom of the bandoliers with a rivet like so that they can loop back up and connect to a button, giving us this adjustable little connection point to the belt, which I think is kind of a nifty solution. Because again, if I want to wear like armor or bulk up for winter wear or something, I need that to be able to expand. I don't want it like riding up around my ribs because I'm wearing more clothing. Oh, and speaking of straps, so I found myself at this point at a little bit of an impasse. See, I was having trouble figuring out the point of this, the baldric, the part that holds the sword. I couldn't think how I wanted it to attach to my belt. Basically, I wanted it to be adjustable so that I can change the angle that my sword is hanging at. Not only that, but whatever strap did that, I also wanted to be able to wrap around and hold that piece of leather closed, right? That the sword is actually sitting in. Took me a bit, but I'm actually really proud of what I came up with. All right, so basically, I cut out this little belt strap here, pretty much like a normal belt would be, with a space for the buckle to go at the end and holes for the keeper to lock into and all that. But I also made 2 extra holes just behind the buckle so that this ring could get locked into place. So by temporarily snapping it all together, you can see that the ring will sit just above that buckle, and then leave a strap able to wrap around and lock my little sword holder into shape. And testing this thing out, I was over the moon with how it actually worked. Not gonna lie, this one took me a little bit to figure out. That left the only other thing I needed to work out was how to connect that ring to the ring that would be on my belt. But to handle that, I just made this simple strap with a button at one end and holes going all along the length. That way all I have to do is wrap it through the rings on both the sword holder and my belt and choose which buttonhole will give me the length I'm looking for. So, you know, just high five me. We did it. It's easy. So with that, all the pieces are ready to go. I hope you're able to follow along with my ramblings. I feel like this one's kind of all over the place. All that's left to do now before we put it together is to add some color. Now, I recently did this episode here in which I tried out a bunch of different dyes and dye methods. That being said, all of the different kinds of dye I used were all the same color. Light brown. I have so much light brown in here. So that's the colors I'm using. I'm using light brown because I got to go through it. But first, another thing I learned from that episode was to pre-treat my leather with this neat's foot oil. I'm specifically only treating the larger bits because I'm using the Phoebings alcohol-based oil, and that tends to dry it out more, and in my tests, the oil really helped with that. I also decided to apply the dye with this little Mr. spray bottle to give a super even finish. That's another thing I learned during that episode. Definitely check that out if you're into leatherworking. That turned out really helpful for me. Now, I didn't have to oil all of these straps because I'm just using the Pro dye, which is already oil-based and doesn't tend to dry the pieces out as much anyways. I decided to use the 2 different dyes because they're so different in color, I found out from that test, that I thought they would kind of juxtapose each other really well, like the contrast would be nice. And again, I have a lot of it. I gotta use it up. Once everything dried off, I gave the leather a quick buff with my rag, before hitting all of the edges with a bit of beeswax and using my slicker brush to lay those edges down and get a nice professional shine to them. All right, so now comes the actual putting all of this crap together. Starting with that D-ring, I went ahead and locked it into place using my snap rivets and the recommended striker that goes along with them. Next, I moved on to putting the straps and rings into place, again using the snap rivets, just to lock everything where I needed it. To do this, I just loop the ends of my straps around the ring, and then use my hole punch to go through all of the layers of leather. This not only helps me make sure everything is in place, but it also keeps the end of that strap super tight around those rings. While doing this part though, and seeing the 2 pieces of leather together, I realized that the colors were bothering me. The colors weren't bad, they look a little orangey on camera, I feel like, but in person, they're nice browns. They just look too clean, I guess. Like the word Fisher Price comes to mind, just kind of plastic, you know? So just to get that out of my head, I went back over everything with an antique paste, just to darken it all up a bit and to mesh the 2 colors together. And it's a little bit hard to pick up on camera, but it actually really helped out a lot. Again, just meshing those colors together and making the whole thing feel more like lived in and less just plastic, I don't know, fake. All right, so with my straps and rings all in place and looking good, I just secured the button onto the end of my belt and then tried this sucker on. And look at how dope that is. I'm so jazzed, even just this little bit fits perfectly. There's plenty of room to adjust it in case I need to wear armor or anything else. Ah, it just looks so good. Now moving on to the baldric bit that actually holds the swords, I grabbed those straps and went ahead and locked that ring into place, followed by my buckle. This gives me my attachment point as well as a way to adjust my straps. I'm also over the friggin' moon at how cool this looks. Though in order to keep everything where I wanted it, I decided to drop some rivets just on the back flap where the straps are. Doing this makes it so that the opening in the leather doesn't rotate around and will always stay right up against me. And look how cool that is! Some of the little straps and buckles like that, I just love it. It looks so good. Now I'll have you know, I have a problem. And while I was doing this, I was so obsessed with the idea of like dual wielding, having my sword and a short sword, that I bought a shorter version of it's the same sword, it's like bite-sized. It's so friggin' cute. And look at this little Baldric, look how friggin' cute that thing is. God, I love these things. Okay, so to wrap this whole thing up, we just need to put together the bandolier section. First things first, I secure those straps onto the ends, which gives me a place to connect it to the belt. I also secured my buttons into place. And just in case it wasn't clear, I do this on both ends of the strap. So part of the design of this thing was to have a little connection point where I can strap my quiver to if I wanted to. So that's the first thing I tackled. Just over my shoulder here, I secured this little ring into place. I just did this by dropping a couple of rivets around the ring on either side of that strap. Then I continued riveting down that strap, again just giving me more places to hang things if I needed it. Now, the character I play is a spellcaster. In order to cast spells, he has these little pieces of paper that he has to rip when he casts them. And I thought it would be cool to have a place where like those rolled up pieces of paper could fit into, like little spell slots. Ah, it's so cool, so D&D, little spell slots. So to make that, I just took that same little piece of metal pipe from earlier and wrapped leather around it to make this little loop. Then I locked that into place with a rivet. I just did this a few more times to give myself multiple little spell slots to use. Now, of course, you don't have to use that for spell slots. If you're doing like a Western kind of LARP or something, you can use them for bullets. You could be an alchemist and have little vials in there. You just hang stuff on it. Useful little spots, that's all. Now, at the very end of that strap, I added just one more ring to give me an extra place to hang stuff. I don't know, like a water bottle or something. All in all, just by adding rivets along the length of that strip, I was able to produce all of these tiny little spaces which I can like tuck daggers into, tie things onto, really use however I saw fit. And check this damn thing out! This is so friggin' cool! Not only do my swords and stuff hang exactly where I need them to be, and look great, but I'm also able to hang a bunch of other stuff wherever I need it. Again, in general, this is just a LARP Batman utility belt. I am so stoked with how this thing came out, it's ridiculous. So thank you, Mike Coy, for suggesting this thing. It was honestly a really fun build to do. I hope this is in the realm of what you were looking for. I know I had fun making it. Now, I also hope the rest of you enjoyed this episode. If you did, why don't you give me some of that like it love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. You've made it to the end screen. I appreciate you. Watching all the way to the end is a great way to tell the YouTube algorithm that you like what I do here. Another amazing way to support this channel is by joining these people's noble ranks. These are my Patreon members, and honestly, they make it so that we're able to do this thing. Special shout out to our newest high tier level Patreon members, Devin E and Ian. Thank you guys so much for all of your generosity. Really appreciate you. If you'd like to join their noble ranks, why don't you consider joining our Patreon? Link in the description below. Or, you know, you just go ahead and click on one of these down here. I like the one on the right, but the one on the left's all right too. You really can't go wrong. Go on, click them. I'll wait.